Brigham, thank you so much for spending some time with me this morning. I'm just gonna start off by saying I love this movie. It was I think everything I needed as far as a perspective to in looking at just a different lens, and I think that Hideki's journey was fantastic. Mark, why don't you just start by telling us a little bit about the movie, and then we'll get into some of the specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. And good to be here with you. So about 30 years ago, this has been a long gestation of this movie. About 30 years ago, I lived in Japan, and then I also did an apprenticeship with a Japanese film director named Yoji Yamada. And that experience for me was tremendously impactful. And I learned a lot from being in this culture. And around that same time, I found an article in a magazine about a ranch in Montana owned by a Japanese company called Zenchiku. And they would send Japanese workers over to Montana to learn ranching on the American side, and they become cowboys. The article was called Samurai Slickers. That idea and that just kind of nugget of the beginning of an idea was very compelling and interesting about, to me, thinking about that clash of cultures and kind of what kind of things would a Japanese businessman experience in Montana. And it did in some ways kind of mirror my own experience as a foreigner going to Japan. And so fast forward 30 years later, I was talking with Brigham. I had a desire. We had worked on a Disney project where I'd done some of the behind the scenes work on Christopher Robin, and I expressed a desire to Brigham that I really wanted to make a feature film, and he was very gracious in kind of allowing me to come and kind of pitch this idea, and it was thankfully an idea that was compelling to Brigham as well. And so that's kind of how this journey started.
Awesome, Brigham. If you want to, what was it that made it so compelling for you?
It was a couple things. One, I responded to the story, just this notion of being able to follow a character out of his element and the contrast of his world coming into this world, which was obvious. But also, it wasn't just that concept. It was the way he wanted to approach it, which was not to make some broad comedy out of it or make it a sort of a high concept comedy. It was just about, let's keep it grounded in what an actual experience might look like, because that's interesting enough. Just to take anyone out of their own world and put them in a strange new world is on its own is interesting. And I thought the ability to try to tell that story in a way that didn't have to put a lot of window dressing on it was interesting. And so I was creatively interested. And then I was also intrigued by the idea of making an independent movie, because it's clear the whole idea was that we'd go out and just be able to raise funds and do this kind of on our own. And this is the kind of movie that needs that, because it's not the kind of story or concept that financiers line up to make. Independent film is there because it's there to sort of produce independent ideas. And so I'd never been able to work on a movie like that. And that alone was also intriguing to me. And so those were sort of my initial motivations.
Now, a film like this doesn't work if you do not have the right lead, and I think Arata Lura was Iura, sorry, was really, really good. Just his transition really from what we see in the beginning, and then his journey as has kind of evolving, maybe not even evolving, just kind of opening up to who he really is behind that kind of robotic worker. It doesn't work if you don't have the right actor. Can you talk a little bit about working with him and what you guys felt he brought to the film?
Yeah, absolutely. We were really fortunate because he was our very first choice when we were presented with a couple of many different options, and we saw some of his work. He just seemed to us to be so authentic and grounded and interesting and a great actor And he comes out of a tradition that's kind of different. You know, his first role was in a Koreeda film, and he was a non-actor. And so he just kind of taps into that authenticity of his own character. And what we discovered later, you know, he immediately liked the script and said that he would like to do it. And what we realized even more as we worked with him later on was that this really is on point with who he is. He is somebody that is very interested in connecting with the land and with experiences, and so this journey of Hideki to coming to Montana very much mirrored his own personal journey and character, and he doesn't speak a lot of English. He hadn't done a film outside of Japan, so he came to Montana and had a very similar experience. And so we were able to kind of use that and talk about that. But he is wonderful. In fact, the entire cast, I couldn't be more happy with the performances. That was very, very important to me. I come myself out of acting, tradition of acting, and so I feel like I understand what actors need, and to have some of those conversations and just let them do what they do best and bring their best performance and give them the space to create in that way was very important, and I think it comes across on the screen.
Yeah, another thing that really struck me was you talked about really the culture clashing. Is how did you develop that? Because they're very specific cultures. I mean, you have the Japanese culture and kind of the traditions as far as work and the way that's viewed, and then you have, you know, that cowboy, that Montana, that farm culture, and then you even mixed in some Latin culture with him going to the quinceañera and getting to know Javier and his family. And I thought that it was it felt very authentic, and it didn't feel like you were forcing anything or trying to play off any stereotype. It just felt like it just really felt, I mean, I guess authentic is the only word. How was that process to make sure that you got all those kind of nuts and bolts right?
Yeah, I mean, a large part of this is certainly the screenplay and our writers, Dave Boyle and Ayako Fujitani, and the great work that they did and the research and all that. But you know, we were trying to find very universal themes within very specific cultures. And so, you know, the Japanese culture and where Arata or Hideki comes from is a very specific world. And then the world of Javier, but he's also kind of an outsider, and they two, you know, become friends. We really did want to be authentic and let this be feel very grounded and real. And so we took pains to make sure that we were representing those cultures in the right way. And we would check in with all of our performers. We would check in a lot with Ayako and with Arata and say, like, does this represent this type of behavior or culture in the right way? Or with Goya Robles, who plays Javier, we would ask him, does this look like a quinceañera to you? You know, are we doing this right? You know, are we getting this right? So, you know, just spending the time to make sure that we were representing cultures in the right way was very important, and I'm glad that comes through.
Brigham, I want to ask you about the pacing of the film, because it feels like it's the correct pacing. It needs to breathe. It needs to have those moments where Hideki is just looking out into the farmland, or is really in thought with himself, or is just kind of embracing the world that he's around. Why was it important kind of to slow it down to make sure that you guys got the right feel for it?
I think that comes out of the earliest conversations about what the intentions were for the project. And I mean, those the creative conversation goes hand in hand, obviously, with a stylistic conversation. And so it was clear to me that this was the kind of story Mark was chasing. And And so that's actually seeps right into the way you schedule and shoot the movie. And again, it all flows very organically out of the, it affects the scripting process, but the ability for the movie to be still and for you to be able to see and notice details, I mean, that is, it's a huge priority in the movie. And so it's not going to be accomplished if you're trying to over stylize it or deal with, pace it up. Those are common concerns, I think, when you deal with commercial filmmaking. And it's like the only note you get for the life of post-production about pacing it up and going faster and faster and faster. Not that we didn't find clever ways to sort of be more efficient in post-production, but the movie that was shot, no matter what we did in editorial, was always going to be a movie that had a very wonderful and still and deliberate pace to it, because that's what was written, that's what was shot, and that's what was performed. And I think it's a movie that invites you to meet it at that same energy, and hopefully so you can start to enjoy the smaller things, because this movie does turn on not huge plot issues, but sort of smaller character transitions.
And it's done very, very well, because you kind of enjoy the subtle changes, and it's very pleasant, I think. Brigham, you did mention something earlier about it not being a comedy. Did you guys have to maybe edit a few things out because maybe it got a little too funny at times, or did you guys kind of control it a little bit better? I mean, it still has its great moments.
Yeah.
Don't get me wrong.
No.
The horse was great. And then go ahead.
We did not. Unless you remember something I don't, Mark. We did not lose any comedy intentionally. We were, it's like that stuff is important. Like that's. And again, it was important that there was comedic moments in the movie. And it was also important in how the comedy was conveyed in the movie, because you communicate what kind of movie you are just by how you go shopping for a joke. And in this case, we only wanted it to come out of something that was very organic and real. It was about real behavior being observed that we can find funny because we recognize it either from one perspective or another, as opposed to being a setup and a punchline, anything like that. And so, we did not have the high class problem of having to lose comedy in the cut. That would have been, pretty amazing, I guess.
Yeah. I had some good conversations early on with our director of photography, Oscar Jimenez. And after reading the script, he had some very insightful and important questions about, like, what kind of movie are we making here? What's the tone of this? What's the pacing? And because he was I don't know if concerned is the right word, but he was wondering if we were going to make a film that is more reaching for the comedy, is more forcing those comedic moments. And so our conversation was more like, no, this has to be grounded always. And the comedy comes out of these very real, authentic situations. And that's why it's even more interesting and funny to me. And we've only had a couple of screenings so far. We're just starting out on our festival run now. But the screenings that we've been in have been very encouraging, because people really get the humor. They're laughing out loud, and even in the sections in Japan, the opening sections. But it is a film that kind of requires the viewer to get into the pace of it, and so I'm hopeful that audiences will give it the time and the attention that it needs to really get into the film and enjoy it.
Yeah, I 100% agree, because some of the funnier moments come from really paying off from things you've seen before. I think some of my favorite ones are the little kid who bites the chocolate bar, and but that's set up from the beginning, and then it's kind of that's a moment of realization for him. I'm trying to be a little vague just because I want everyone to enjoy it. I think my favorite moment is when I don't remember his name, but Jun Kurimura's character, he's waking up in the hospital, and he's like, who are you? I found that great, because it's a whole different person than who he remembered. And hopefully I don't know, I should just mention it's kind of funny, but it's also kind of a turn, a moment is when he's riding the bull, and somebody walks in. that was funny and an moment at the same time. But like you guys said, it's all organic, and I think I really appreciated that, because you didn't I was you guys weren't. It was nice for you guys to trust your audience. I think that's what I'm trying to say.
Good. I'm glad you appreciated that aspect. It was important to us because these are moments. The moments you even outlined, they can be in the hands of a different director. They could be totally very, very different, and they could be really shooting for broader comedy. Because the situations, it just all depends on execution and how he's directing his actors and the camera. And so I liked the choices there too.
Was it ever a question also to integrate both languages, or did you guys ever have a conversation that maybe we should have this film be in English, or was it important to make sure that he could not speak English, and the audience we have to use subtitles at times?
So important, because really, we wanted to make a film about communication and the difficulty and the divide between people, and one of the things that divides people is just basic communication and being able to speak the same language, and so that having not only the Japanese but the Spanish that Javier speaks, and that moment in the quinceañera when the father is speaking in Spanish and Hideki doesn't understand what he's saying, but yet his heart is being kind of cracked open by just the emotion. There's different language that's being spoken at that point to Hideki's heart. And so language is really important to this.
Yeah. And I think that we talked about it early on and recognized that even though we kept reading scripts that they're all typed in English, right? And just with some italicized and some not, but sometimes you can forget as you're just reading these drafts that, like, of course we have to translate all this. Half of it's in Japanese, a quarter of it is in Spanish, the rest is in English. But the beauty also of just being this independent project, we weren't responsible to anyone other than ourselves and ultimately our investors, was that there was never a conversation about finding some clever way to make sure that everyone was speaking English, for some sort of broader international reach. Just what you go to the summer, like, it was clever. I love the movie Mission Impossible, this is the most recent one. I had a great time watching it, but in the first 5 minutes, or in the first 2 minutes, they have to come up with a clever device to ensure that they're not speaking Russian, but they're speaking English, just by saying, hey, we're just flip your minds. And, this was a film that never had to consider such a device.
Yeah, it was done very well. I really enjoyed it. One last question for you both. Personally, in making an indie film, obviously the film's very personal. There's a lot more hands-on work. What is your personal takeaway from working on this project?
Wow, I mean, this has been a big goal of mine for a long time. I've had a long career in television and documentary and corporate industrial type of work. I've worked for 30 years in that and made a good living and supported a family and had a really wonderful experience. But I always wanted to start this new journey of making a feature film, and so that was very exciting and also frightening, and at the same time, because you reach that point where you're wondering, okay, I've told myself for all these years that this is something that I can do and I can do well. What if I can't? What if I fall on my face? What if I'm no good at this? And so that was daunting, but at some point I just made kind of a switch in my mind to just say, I'm going to go into this experience. I'm going to embrace it all. I'm going to have the best time I can. I'm going to do my best. And this was an incredible experience. And the film as it is very close to the film that I had in my head. And so that's very gratifying that this film turned out the way that I wanted it to. Whether or not it appeals to an audience, I hope that it does. I hope people are surprisingly charmed by this kind of gentle narrative about Hideki. So it's been really amazing for me personally, and I hope that this is the first of many that I am fortunate to work on.
Yeah, I'll answer it in this way, that I got to learn firsthand, that you can do so much more with less. I again, very accustomed just to working within the studio system, and you have a lot of people, a lot of backstops, a lot of money going into it, and sometimes that's necessary for the kind of movies you're trying to make there. But here we had very little, but we worked with the right people, and everyone stepped up and did a lot. And you learned that you can also wear a lot of different hats to make sure, one day you might produce, and another day you might be assistant set decorator, whatever it might require. And so you get to stretch yourself, and you get to learn about what you're capable of, and it's all the more enjoyable for that. And so that was a big takeaway from me.
Mark, if this is the kind of movie that you're making, then yes, we really hope that you continue to make them. I'll be honest with both of you gentlemen. It's films like this, the reason why I love covering independent films, because you get a lot of heart, and then you get sometimes really big surprises and really great movies that then you can go ahead and share with others, because you're the cool guy who knows the indie films. Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for the film. I can't say enough how much I enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have fun continuing to screen it.
Thanks,
Great.
Manny.